Velder stood at the docking port and watched the human ship come closer. He did not want to be here. He did not want to work with humans. But the Galactic Council had given orders. And Velder was a soldier who followed orders. The Kithrani warrior had served his empire for 47 cycles. His green scales carried the marks of countless battles. Deep scars ran across his chest and arms. His yellow eyes had seen worlds burn and armies fall. He had killed more enemies than he could count. Among his people, he was a legend, and now they sent him to serve with humans. Velder knew very little about humans. He knew they came from a small blue planet in a quiet corner of the galaxy. He knew they had only discovered space travel 300 years ago. He knew they were soft and weak, with no claws, no scales, no natural weapons of any kind. They lived for less than 100 cycles, which seemed like nothing to a Kithrani who could live for 500. The docking clamps locked into place with a heavy sound. The airlock doors opened. Velder picked up his bag and walked forward. He kept his face empty of emotion. He would do this mission. He would work with these weak creatures. And then he would go home and forget he ever met them. The human ship was called Relentless Hope. Velder thought it was a strange name. His people named their ships after weapons and warriors. They did not name them after feelings. A human stood waiting for him on the other side of the airlock. The creature was tall for its species, with brown skin and short black hair. It wore a uniform with many symbols on the chest. It smiled at Velder and held out its hand. "Welcome aboard," the human said. "I am Captain Daniel Torres. We are glad to have you with us." Velder looked at the hand. He knew this was a human greeting, but he did not take it. He simply nodded his head once. "I am Velder of the 3rd Combat Legion. I am here because the council ordered me to be here." Captain Torres lowered his hand. The smile stayed on his face, but something in his eyes changed. "I understand. This is new for all of us. Come, let me show you the ship." They walked through narrow halls made of gray metal. The ship was small compared to Kithrani warships. Everything looked simple and basic. Velder saw nothing impressive about any of it. They passed several humans along the way. They all stopped to look at Velder. Some of them seemed scared. Others seemed curious. A few of them smiled and nodded. Velder ignored them all. Captain Torres kept talking as they walked. "We have 23 crew members. Most of them have never worked with other species before. But they are good people. They will treat you with respect." Velder said nothing. They reached a door marked with human letters. Torres opened it and stepped aside. "These are your quarters. I hope they are acceptable." Velder looked inside. The room was small. There was a bed that looked too soft, a desk with a chair, and a window that showed the stars outside. It was nothing like his quarters back home, but it would do. "It is acceptable," Velder said. Torres nodded. "Dinner is at 1800 hours in the mess hall. I would like you to meet the rest of the crew. We leave for the mission tomorrow morning." After the captain left, Velder sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress bent under his weight. He looked around the tiny room and felt very far from home. He thought about the mission ahead. The Dominion of Shadows had attacked the neutral territories. They were a terrible enemy, cruel and powerful. The Galactic Council had formed a coalition to stop them. Warriors from many species would fight together, but Velder did not see how humans could help. They were too weak, too fragile. They would break at the first sign of real combat. He would probably have to protect them while also fighting the enemy. The thought made him angry. At 1800 hours, Velder went to the mess hall. The room was filled with humans eating and talking. The sound died when he walked in. Everyone turned to look at him. Captain Torres stood up from a table in the center. "Velder, please join us." The warrior walked forward. He could feel every human eye on him. Some of them looked away when he met their gaze. Others kept staring. He sat down in an empty chair next to the captain. Torres began to introduce the crew. "This is Lieutenant Katie Morgan, my second in command." A woman with red hair and sharp green eyes nodded at Velder. Her face showed no fear, only calm study. She was measuring him, trying to understand what kind of creature he was. Velder respected that, even if he did not show it. "This is Sergeant Ben Ortiz, leader of our ground combat unit." A large man with dark eyes and a shaved head raised his hand in greeting. His arms were covered with colorful pictures drawn on his skin. Velder had heard of this human practice. They called it tattooing. He did not understand why anyone would mark their skin with pictures of flowers and skulls. "And this is Maria Santos, our medic." A small woman with kind brown eyes smiled at him. "It is an honor to meet a Kithrani warrior," she said. "I have read much about your people. Velder did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Torres continued around the table, naming each crew member. There was Chris Hawkins, the young pilot with messy blonde hair who could not stop making jokes. There was Amy Chen, a private who looked barely old enough to fight. There was Greg Powell, the engineer who kept the ship running. And many others. Velder tried to remember their names but found it difficult. Humans all looked similar to him. Same soft skin. Same round eyes. Same weak bodies. He did not see how he would tell them apart in the chaos of battle. Food was placed in front of him. It was some kind of meat with vegetables and bread. Velder ate it without tasting it. His people did not eat for pleasure. They ate for fuel, nothing more. The humans around him talked and laughed. They told stories about their homes and families. Chris Hawkins made a joke about something called a chicken and everyone laughed except Velder. He did not understand the joke. He did not try to understand. Katie Morgan leaned over to him. "You seem uncomfortable," she said quietly. "I am not uncomfortable," Velder replied. "I am simply waiting for this mission to end." Morgan raised an eyebrow. "You do not want to be here." "No, because you think we are weak." Velder turned to look at her. She met his gaze without flinching. Most creatures could not do that. His yellow eyes were unsettling to many species. But this small human woman stared right back at him. "Your bodies are fragile," Velder said. "You have no natural defenses. Your lives are short. By every measure, you are a weak species." Morgan nodded slowly. "I understand why you think that. Many species do when they first meet us." She smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something he did not. "But you might be surprised. Humans have a way of changing minds." Velder did not believe her. He had seen too many battles, faced too many enemies. He knew what strength looked like, and these humans did not have it, but somewhere deep inside, in a place he would never admit existed, he felt a small spark of curiosity. What made this woman so confident? What did she know that he did not? He pushed the feeling away. It did not matter. He would complete this mission, and then he would never see these humans again. He did not know how wrong he was. The frozen moon of Araxis 7 was a terrible place. Wind cut through the air like knives made of ice. Snow covered everything in white death. The temperature was so low that exposed skin would freeze in minutes. Velder stood with the coalition forces at the base of a rocky canyon. 12 Kithrani warriors had joined the mission. They stood apart from the humans, their scales turning pale blue in the cold. Velder was proud to see his own kind again. These were real warriors. Together, they would show the humans how true soldiers fought. Captain Torres gathered everyone for the final briefing. His breath came out in white clouds as he spoke. "The Shadow Dominion has a communications outpost at the top of this canyon. Our job is simple. Get in, destroy the array, and get out. Intelligence says there are only 20 guards. We have them outnumbered. We should be done in an hour." Velder did not like the word should. In his experience, nothing ever went the way it should. They began the climb into the canyon. The humans moved slowly, struggling against the wind and snow. The Kithrani moved faster, their clawed feet gripping the ice with ease. Velder stayed near the back, watching the humans with disappointment. They were already falling behind. Private Amy Chen slipped on a patch of ice. She fell hard on her side and slid toward the edge of a cliff. Sergeant Ben Ortiz grabbed her arm and pulled her back to safety. "Thanks," Chen said. "Breathing hard. Watch your step," Ortiz replied. "The ice is treacherous." Velder shook his head. These creatures could not even walk on ice without falling. How would they fight the shadow forces? They reached the midpoint of the canyon when everything went wrong. The first plasma bolt came out of nowhere. It struck one of the Kithrani warriors in the chest. He fell without a sound, dead before he hit the ground. More bolts followed. They came from above, from positions hidden in the rocks on both sides of the canyon. The 20 guards had become to 100. This was not an outpost. This was a trap ambush. Torres shouted, "Take cover!" Everyone scattered. The humans dug behind rocks and into small caves. The Kithrani tried to form a defensive line, but the enemy fire was too heavy. Another warrior fell. Then another. Velder found shelter behind a large boulder. He pressed his back against the cold stone and tried to think. The enemy had the high ground. They had superior numbers. The coalition forces were trapped in a kill zone with no way out. He heard screaming. One of the Kithrani warriors was hit in the leg. He lay in the open, trying to crawl to safety. 2 of his brothers ran out to help him. The enemy cut them down before they took 3 steps. Velder felt his heart beating fast. This was not fear, he told himself. Kithrani did not feel fear, but his hands were shaking and he could not make them stop. Then he saw something that made him forget his own terror. Private Amy Chen was hit. A plasma bolt struck her shoulder, burning through armor and flesh. She screamed in pain and fell against a rock. Blood began to pour from the wound, steaming in the cold air. Any Kithrani warrior with such a wound would have accepted death. They would have closed their eyes and waited for the end with dignity. That was the way of honor, but Chen did not accept death. She clenched her teeth so hard that Velder could see her jaw muscles straining. With her good hand, she picked up her fallen rifle. She braced it against the rock and began to fire back at the enemy. Each shot sent a jolt of pain through her wounded shoulder. She did not stop. Velder stared at her. He could not believe what he was seeing. This small human, this fragile creature, refused to die. She was wounded and bleeding and trapped, but she kept fighting. Then came the Berserker. It dropped from the rocks above like a nightmare made flesh. The Shadow Berserker stood 9 feet tall. Its body was covered in black armor that seemed to drink in light. Instead of hands, it had blades, each one as long as a human arm and sharper than any sword. The creature landed right in front of Sergeant Ben Ortiz. Ortiz had no time to raise his rifle. The Berserker was too close, too fast. Any normal soldier would have died in that moment. But Ortiz did something that Velder would remember for the rest of his life. He attacked. The human sergeant pulled a combat knife from his belt and charged at the monster. The Berserker swung one bladed arm at his head. Ortiz ducked under it, moving faster than Velder thought possible. The blade missed by inches. Ortiz drove his knife into the joint where the Berserker's arm met its shoulder. Black blood sprayed across the snow. The creature screamed in rage and swung again. Ortiz rolled away, pulling his knife free as he moved. The Berserker was not dead, but it was hurt and distracted. Those 3 seconds gave Ortiz's squad time to reposition. They found better cover and began returning fire. Velder watched Ortiz run back to cover. Blood on his face that was not his own. The human looked back at the Berserker with no fear in his eyes. Only determination. Captain Torres was everywhere at once. He ran through the battle like a man who did not know he could die. He pulled wounded soldiers to safety. He returned fire at the enemy. He shouted orders that somehow cut through the chaos of screaming and explosions. We push forward. Torres yelled. The communications array is still the target. We finish the mission or we die trying. That is the job. It was madness. They were outnumbered and outgunned. Retreat was the only logical choice. But the humans did not retreat. They formed up behind their captain and pushed forward. Velder did not understand. This was not strategy. This was not tactics. This was something else, something he had never seen before. The humans were not fighting to win. They were fighting because they refused to lose. There was a difference, and in that moment, Velder began to understand it. He joined them. The coalition forces pushed up the canyon, fighting for every step. More warriors fell on both sides. The snow turned red and black with blood. The wind carried the sounds of death in every direction. Maria Santos ran through the middle of the battle, dragging wounded soldiers to cover and treating their injuries. She had no weapon, no armor, nothing to protect her. She should have died a dozen times. But somehow, she kept moving, kept saving lives. Chris Hawkins had been hit in the arm. The young pilot could barely hold his rifle. But when a shadow soldier broke through their line, Hawkins tackled the creature and beat it with a rock until it stopped moving. Then he picked up his rifle and kept fighting. Katie Morgan commanded the left flank with a voice like steel. She called out enemy positions before anyone else saw them. She never missed a shot. She never showed fear. She was a wall of calm in the middle of chaos. They reached the communications array as darkness fell. The fighting had lasted 6 hours. Bodies lay everywhere. The snow was painted with death. Sergeant Ortiz placed the explosives while the others held the perimeter. His hands were steady even though he was bleeding from 3 wounds. When the charges were set, he looked at Torres and nodded, everyone back. Torres ordered, they ran. The explosives detonated behind them. The communications array disappeared in a ball of fire and smoke. The mission was complete, but they could not reach the extraction point. Shadow reinforcements blocked every path. The coalition forces retreated into an abandoned mining complex. Hoping the walls would protect them until rescue arrived, Velder followed them inside. He counted the survivors. 8 humans remained. He was the only Kithrani left alive. 12 of his brothers had fallen in the canyon. He looked at the humans around him. They were wounded and tired and covered in blood. But they were alive. They had completed the mission when every logic said they should have failed. Velder did not understand how, but for the first time in his life, he wanted to find out. The mining complex was dark and cold. Ancient machines sat silent in the shadows, covered in dust and ice. The tunnels stretched deep into the frozen ground, disappearing into blackness. Velder helped the humans set up a defensive position near the main entrance. They piled old equipment into barriers. They set up motion sensors in the outer tunnels. They did everything they could to prepare for the attack that was sure to come. When the work was done, they gathered in a small chamber that had once been a control room. A single emergency light gave them enough glow to see each other. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded animal. Velder sat apart from the humans, his back against the wall. He watched them in silence, trying to understand these strange creatures. Captain Torres was talking to Katie Morgan about the enemy positions. His voice was calm, but Velder could see the tension in his shoulders. The captain knew they were in trouble. He just did not show it. Ben Ortiz was being treated by Maria Santos. The sergeant had taken a blade across his ribs during the battle. The cut was deep, but he refused to let Santos give him the only dose of strong pain medicine they had left. Save it for someone who really needs it. Ortiz said through clenched teeth, "You have a 6-inch cut in your side." Santos replied, "I think you qualify." Ortiz shook his head. "I can handle pain. Use it on the private." He meant Amy Chen. The young soldier lay on a makeshift bed in the corner, her shoulder wrapped in blood-soaked bandages. She was unconscious. Her face was pale, and her breathing was shallow. Velder did not understand Ortiz. The Kithrani way was to take what you needed to keep fighting. Personal suffering meant nothing compared to battle readiness. But this human was choosing to suffer so another could be helped out. It made no sense. When Santos finished with Ortiz, she came over to Velder. She carried a small metal container in her hand. "You were hit too," she said. "Let me look at it." Velder glanced down at his arm. A plasma bolt had grazed him during the battle. The scales were burned away, and the flesh underneath was raw and blistered. He had forgotten about it. "It is nothing," he said. Santos sat down next to him anyway. She opened her container and began to clean the wound. Her touch was gentle but firm. "You Kithrani are tough," she said. "This would have taken a human's arm off. We are built for war," Velder replied. "Our bodies are weapons." Santos nodded as she worked. "And yet here we are. Same place, same fight." Velder said nothing to that. He watched her apply a bandage to his arm. Her hands were steady despite everything she had been through. "Why do you do this?" he asked suddenly. Santos looked up at him. "Do what?" "Help, heal. You could carry a weapon. You could fight. But instead, you spend the battle running into danger to save others." Santos smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was real. "Because that is who I am. Fighters need someone to put them back together. That is my job, but you could die. You have no protection." "I know." She finished with the bandage and closed her container. "But if I stayed safe while others bled, I would not be able to live with myself. What is the point of surviving if you lose who you are?" Velder did not have an answer for that. Across the room, Chris Hawkins pulled something from his pocket. It was a small piece of paper with a picture on it. Velder saw a tiny human face, round and soft, with barely any hair. "That is my daughter," Hawkins said, showing it to Greg Powell. "She was born 3 months ago. Her name is Lily." Powell looked at the picture and smiled. "She has your eyes. Poor kid," Hawkins joked, but his voice cracked as he said it. He stared at the picture for a long moment. "I promised her I would come home. I told my wife I would be there for Lily's first birthday." Velder watched the young pilot's face. He saw fear there, but also something else. Something that looked like love. "You will make it home," Powell said. "We all will." It was a lie. They both knew it was a lie. But Hawkins nodded anyway, and he put the picture back in his pocket, close to his heart. Captain Torres stood up and looked around the room. "We should try to sleep. The enemy will come at dawn. We need to be ready." No one argued. They found places on the cold floor and tried to rest. But no one really slept. They lay in the darkness, thinking about what was coming. Velder did not even try to close his eyes. He sat against the wall and watched the humans. After an hour, Katie Morgan came over and sat beside him. She moved quietly, like someone who knew how to be invisible when she wanted to be. "You are the last Kithrani," she said softly. "Yes, I am sorry. Your people fought bravely." Velder looked at her. Her green eyes reflected the dim emergency light. "They died because they underestimated the enemy. They thought their strength would be enough." Morgan nodded. That happens to a lot of species the first time they face the shadows. Your people did not underestimate them. We never underestimate anyone. Morgan looked around the room at her fellow humans. We cannot afford to. We are too weak to be overconfident. It was strange to hear a warrior speak of weakness so openly. Among the Kithrani, admitting weakness was shameful. But Morgan said it like it was simply a fact, neither good nor bad. How do you keep fighting? Velder asked. You know you are weaker than most species. You know your bodies are fragile. How do you face enemies like the shadows and not give up? Morgan thought for a moment before answering. Because giving up means dying. And we really do not want to die. She smiled slightly. Humans have a lot to live for. Families, friends, dreams. We fight so hard because we love life so much. The Kithrani are taught that death is natural. Accepting death makes a warrior strong. Maybe, but we think differently. We believe that fighting for life makes us stronger than accepting death ever could. She looked at the sleeping forms of her crew. Every person in this room has someone waiting for them. A parent, a child, a lover, someone who needs them to come home. That is why we fight. Velder considered her words. His people had families too, but they did not speak of them in battle. Personal connections were seen as distractions. Warriors were supposed to be empty of attachment, focused only on duty and honor. But watching these humans, he began to wonder if attachment was not a weakness at all. Maybe it was the opposite. Maybe loving something so much that you would die for it was the greatest strength of all. Maria Santos walked over with her metal container. She held it out to Velder. What is this? He asked. Coffee. It is what humans drink when they need to stay awake. Velder took the container and sniffed the liquid inside. It smelled bitter and strange. He took a small sip and almost spit it out. The taste was terrible. Santos laughed softly. It is an acquired taste. Why do you drink something so unpleasant? Because it keeps us going. Even when we are tired. Even when we want to quit. She sat down on his other side. That is kind of the human way, I guess. We do what we have to do, even when it is hard. Even when it hurts. Velder looked down at the container in his hands. Such a small thing. Just a drink. But somehow it said more about humans than anything else he had seen. They did not give up. They found ways to keep going. They made bitter things bearable because they had to. In that moment. Sitting in the cold dark with enemies all around, Velder felt something shift inside him. He looked at these humans, really looked at them. And he did not see weakness anymore. He saw something he had never expected to find. He saw hope. And for the first time in his life, Velder understood that hope might be the most powerful weapon of all. Dawn came with the sound of explosions. The shadow forces had found them. They were blasting through the main entrance of the mining complex, sending fire and smoke through the tunnels. The walls shook with each explosion. Dust rained from the ceiling. Captain Torres was on his feet in an instant. Everyone up. They are coming. The humans moved fast. Despite their wounds, despite their exhaustion, they grabbed their weapons and ran to their positions. Velder followed, his own rifle ready in his clawed hands. They set up at the choke point, a narrow passage where the tunnels came together. The enemy would have to come through here. There was no other way. Torres looked at his soldiers. His eyes moved from face to face. Katie Morgan, Ben Ortiz, Maria Santos, Chris Hawkins, Greg Powell, Amy Chen, who had woken up and refused to stay behind. And to other soldiers, Danny Brooks and Lisa Park, 8 humans and 1 Kithrani. Against an army, I will not lie to you, Torres said. This is bad. The rescue fleet is still hours away. We are outnumbered by at least 10-1. Our ammunition is running low. No one spoke. They all knew what he was saying. Torres continued. But we are going to hold this line. Not because we have to. Because that is who we are. We do not quit. We do not surrender. We fight until the end, whatever that end may be. He paused and looked at each of them again. If this is our last stand, then let us make it one they will never forget. There was no cheering. No brave speeches. The humans simply nodded and turned to face the darkness ahead. Velder saw no fear in their eyes. Only determination. The first wave came 5 minutes later. Shadow soldiers poured into the tunnel, their black armor making them almost invisible in the darkness. There were dozens of them, moving like a wave of death. The humans opened fire. The sound was deafening. Rifles cracked. Plasma bolts screamed through the air. Bodies fell on both sides. The tunnel filled with smoke and the smell of burning. Velder fought beside them. His claws tore through any enemy that got too close. His rifle never stopped firing. He moved on instinct, killing without thinking, lost in the rhythm of battle. But the enemy kept coming. For every shadow soldier that fell, two more took its place. They climbed over their own dead to reach the coalition line. Katie Morgan commanded the left side of the passage. Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Enemy flanking left. Brooks, cover that angle. Park, reload and support. She never missed a target. Her rifle moved from enemy to enemy with perfect precision. When her clip ran empty, she switched to her sidearm without missing a beat. When the sidearm ran dry, she picked up a fallen shadow rifle and kept firing. Ben Ortiz led the center. Blood soaked through his bandages, but he did not slow down. When a group of shadow soldiers tried to rush the line, Ortiz met them head-on. He fought with his fists when his rifle jammed. He used a shadow corpse as a shield when he needed to reload. Hold the line. He roared, do not give them a single step. Amy Chen fought through the pain of her wounded shoulder. Her face was white, and her hands were shaking, but she kept her rifle steady. Every shot she fired found a target. When a shadow soldier broke through the line near her position, she drew a knife with her good hand and killed it before it could touch her. Greg Powell was not a combat soldier. He was an engineer, but he fought like a man possessed. He rigged grenades from spare parts and rolled them into the enemy ranks. When the grenades ran out, he picked up a rifle and joined the firing line. Maria Santos stayed behind the line, pulling wounded soldiers to safety and treating their injuries. She worked with speed and skill, saving lives even as death surrounded her on all sides. And Chris Hawkins, the young pilot who always made jokes, became something else entirely. When the enemy pushed to close, Hawkins left his cover and charged at them. He screamed as he ran, firing from the hip. 2 shadow soldiers fell before they could react. A third tried to grab him. Hawkins broke its arm and shot it in the face, but then a grenade landed at his feet. There was no time to run, no time to throw it away. The only person close enough to be killed was Maria Santos, who was treating a wounded soldier behind him. Hawkins did not hesitate. He threw himself on top of Santos, covering her body with his own. The grenade exploded. Shrapnel tore through his legs. He screamed in agony. When the smoke cleared, Santos was alive. Her patient was alive. And Hawkins was bleeding from wounds that would have killed most men, but he was not dead. Santos tried to help him, but he pushed her away. Keep treating the others, he said through clenched teeth. I can still shoot. He dragged himself to a crate, propped his back against it, and pulled out his sidearm. His legs were destroyed. He could not stand, but he could still pull a trigger. Velder saw all of this. He saw humans fighting beyond their limits. He saw them refusing to die when every part of their bodies was screaming for them to give up. He saw courage that he had never imagined possible. The enemy commander appeared at the front of the tunnel. It was a Shadow Lord, a creature of darkness and power. Its armor was decorated with the bones of fallen enemies. Its eyes burned with purple fire. In one hand, it carried a blade that crackled with energy. Surrender, the Shadow Lord said. Its voice echoed through the tunnel like thunder. Surrender, and I will make your deaths quick. Captain Torres stepped forward. His uniform was torn and bloody. A cut above his eye dripped red down his face. But he stood straight and tall, and his voice did not waver. We do not surrender. The Shadow Lord laughed. You cannot win. You are nothing. Weak, fragile creatures from a weak, fragile world. Torres smiled. It was not a friendly smile. Then come and prove it. The Shadow Lord charged. Torres met it with nothing but a combat knife. The duel was short but brutal. The Shadow Lord was faster and stronger. Its blade cut through the air like lightning. But Torres moved like water, bending and flowing around each strike. He had spent his whole life preparing for moments like this. The Shadow Lord swung high. Torres ducked low. The blade missed his head by inches. Torres drove his knife into the joint of the creature's armor, finding the gap between plates. The Shadow Lord screamed. Torres pulled the knife free and stabbed again. And again. And again. The Shadow Lord fell. For a moment, the tunnel was silent. The enemy soldiers stared at their fallen commander. The humans stared at their captain. Velder stared at both. Torres pulled his bloody knife from the Shadow Lord's body and pointed it at the remaining enemies. Who is next? The enemy broke. They turned and ran, fleeing back down the tunnel, leaving their dead behind. The attack was over. The line had held. Velder looked around at the survivors. Danny Brooks was dead, killed in the final push. Lisa Park had a wound in her stomach that Santos was desperately trying to treat. Everyone else was injured in some way, but they were alive. Against impossible odds, they had held the line. Torres collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. Blood dripped from a dozen wounds. He looked like a man who should have been dead hours ago, but he was smiling. Not bad. He said to no one in particular. Not bad at all. Velder went to stand beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Velder said, "That was the bravest thing I have ever seen." Torres looked up at him. "We are just soldiers doing our job." "No," Velder shook his head. "You are something more than that. Something I do not have a word for." Torres closed his eyes. "Let me know when you find one." In the distance, the sound of ships grew louder. The rescue fleet was finally arriving. They had held on just long enough, but the battle had cost them dearly. And for Chris Hawkins, propped against his crate with a smile on his face and a picture of his daughter in his hand, the cost would be everything. The rescue ships descended through the smoke and fire. Their engines roared as they landed in the snow outside the mining complex. Soldiers poured out, weapons ready, expecting to find nothing but bodies. Instead, they found survivors. Medics rushed to help the wounded. Captain Torres was carried out on a stretcher, unconscious from blood loss but still breathing. Katie Morgan walked out on her own feet, refusing any help despite the wounds that covered her body. Ben Ortiz had to be dragged out because he refused to leave until everyone else was safe. Velder walked beside them, watching everything in silence. His wounds had stopped bleeding, but he barely noticed the pain. His mind was somewhere else, replaying the events of the last 2 days over and over again. Chris Hawkins did not walk out. The young pilot had died 43 minutes before the rescue fleet arrived. He had kept fighting until the very end, firing his sidearm from behind that crate even as his life drained away. When Maria Santos finally reached him, he was already gone. The picture of his daughter was still clutched in his hand. They carried his body out with full honors. Every soldier who passed stopped and saluted. Even the hardened veterans wiped tears from their eyes. Velder watched them carry Hawkins away. He thought about the young man who had made jokes at dinner and shown everyone pictures of his baby daughter. He thought about how that same man had thrown himself on a grenade to save someone else's life. On the ship back to the fleet, Velder sat alone. The survivors were being treated in the medical bay. He should have been there too, getting his wounds looked at. But he needed time to think. Maria Santos found him in the observation room, staring out at the stars. "The captain is going to be okay," she said, sitting down beside him. "Katie and Ben too. Amy lost her arm, but she is alive. Lisa is in critical condition, but the doctors think she will make it." Velder nodded slowly. "And the others?" "Danny Brooks died in the battle. You know about Chris." Santos's voice caught on the name. "Greg Powell lost the fingers, but he is already asking when he can get back to work." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars drift by. "I do not understand you," Velder finally said. Santos looked at him. "What do you mean?" "Everything. All of it." He turned to face her. "Chris Hawkins threw himself on a grenade for you. He gave his life so you could live. Why would anyone do that?" Santos was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft, because that is what humans do for each other. We protect each other. We die for each other. Not because of duty or honor, but because we love each other. Love. Velder tasted the word like it was something strange and foreign. The Kithrani have a word for love, but we do not use it in war. War is about strength and victory. It is not about love. For us, war is about love, Santos said. We fight because we love our families. We love our homes. We love our friends. We love life itself. She paused. Chris fought so hard because he wanted to go home to his daughter. And when he could not do that anymore, he fought so that I could go home to mine. Velder felt something tighten in his chest. He did not know what it was. His people were not supposed to feel such things. My species believes that accepting death makes you strong, he said quietly. We are taught that fear is weakness and attachment is a distraction. A true warrior cares about nothing except the battle, and what do you believe now? Velder looked out at the stars. Somewhere among them was his home world, where his people lived by their ancient codes of strength and honor. He had followed those codes his whole life. They had made him the warrior he was, but they had also made him blind. I believe I was wrong, he said. About everything. 2 weeks later, the Galactic Council held a ceremony to honor the survivors of Araxis 7. Representatives from every species in the coalition gathered in the Great Hall to watch medals being presented. Vel Thor stood in the line with the human survivors. Captain Torres was there, walking on his own despite the doctors telling him to rest. Katie Morgan stood beside him, her face calm as always. Ben Ortiz wore his dress uniform, the first time anyone had seen him out of combat gear. Maria Santos held the medal they were giving to Chris Hawkins, which she would deliver to his widow when it was Velthor's turn. The council leader placed a medal around his neck and spoke of his bravery in battle. Velthor accepted it in silence. The medal meant nothing to him. It was just a piece of metal. What mattered was what he had learned. After the ceremony, Velthor requested a meeting with Captain Torres. They sat together in a small room off the main hall, just the two of them. I want to request a transfer, Velthor said. Torres raised an eyebrow. A transfer? To where? To your fleet. To the human forces. Velthor held the captain's gaze. I want to serve with your people. Torres leaned back in his chair. That is unusual. The Kithrani do not serve with other species. I know. My superiors will think I have lost my mind. They will say I am dishonoring my ancestors. Velthor paused. But I do not care. Something changed in me on that frozen moon. I saw things I cannot unsee. I learned things I cannot unlearn. What did you learn? Velthor thought carefully before answering. He wanted to get the words right. I have fought in 37 campaigns across 11 star systems. I have faced enemies that would give nightmares to most species. I have killed more than I can count. And through all of it, I believed I understood what courage was. He shook his head slowly. I was wrong. Torres waited in silence. The Kithrani taught me that courage is the absence of fear. Velthor continued. That a true warrior feels nothing when facing death. We are trained to accept our fate without emotion, to fight without caring whether we live or die. He leaned forward, his yellow eyes intense. But your people showed me something different. Your soldiers were afraid. I saw it in their eyes. They knew they were probably going to die. They felt that fear in every part of their bodies. And they fought anyway. Velthor stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the ships gathered in the fleet, hundreds of vessels from dozens of species. Courage is not the absence of fear, he said. Courage is fighting even when you are afraid. It is protecting others when you cannot protect yourself. It is holding on to hope when there is no logical reason to hope. He turned back to Torres. Your pilot, Chris Hawkins, was terrified. He had a wife and a daughter waiting for him. He wanted to live more than anything in the galaxy. And yet, when the moment came, he gave his life to save another. Not because he did not fear death, but because he loved life so much that he was willing to sacrifice his own, so that someone else could keep living. Torres' eyes glistened. But he said nothing. That is true courage, Velthor said. And I have never seen it among my own people. We accept death because we do not value life enough to fight for it. Humans fight for life with everything they have because life is precious to them. He walked back to his chair and sat down. I want to learn from your people. I want to understand how such fragile creatures can burn with such a fierce fire. I want to become the warrior I should have been all along. Torres was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. Welcome to the fleet, he said. In the years that followed, Velthor served alongside humans in a dozen campaigns. He learned their customs, their jokes, their strange habits. He drank their terrible coffee. He celebrated their victories and mourned their losses. And whenever young warriors asked him about humans, he always gave the same answer. Do not be fooled by their soft skin and short lives, he would say. They burn with a fire that puts stars to shame. Their bodies are weak, but their spirits are stronger than any armor. If you ever have the honor of fighting beside them, pay attention. They will teach you things about yourself you never knew you needed to learn. He would think of Chris Hawkins and his photograph. He would think of Maria Santos and her gentle hands. He would think of Ben Ortiz and his stubborn courage, of Katie Morgan and her steel calm, of Captain Torres and his unbreakable will, and he would remember the lesson he learned on that frozen moon so many years ago. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is loving life so fiercely that you will fight for it until your very last breath. That is what the humans taught him. That is what courage truly is.